This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and very happy to have on the line with us Dr. Baz Dreisinger. Dr. Dreisinger has a new book out. It's called Incarceration Nations, A Journey to Justice in Prisons Around the World. And extraordinary. He's a professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and City University of New York, journalist, advocate, activist, author of this book, available at Amazon and all the other any bookstore. Incarceration Nations. Dr. Dreisinger, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. It was Michael Moore's movie Where to Invade Next that first introduced me to the idea that Norway had something, knew something about prisons and policing that we didn't. I understand that as part of your book, you traveled to Norway, or you studied their prisons?
I did. I visited 2 prisons in Norway, and absolutely, Norway actually has a radical notion that social services can prevent crime in the first place, and then when crime does occur, Norway treats it quite differently from the way we do. So
tell us about it. What does that? Those are kind of generalities. How does that translate into actual behavior? How would the police? How would an interaction with police in Norway be different from an interaction with police in the United States? And how does the experience of going to prison in Norway differ from the experience of going to prison in the United States?
So for one, the fact that there is readily available social services in Norway means that fewer people are going to be locked up. There's more. It's a much more equal society than almost any society on earth. So there's very little poverty. It's essentially a wealthy socialist nation. So that right there is already going to limit the interactions that people are having with police and their likelihood to commit crime, because we know that crime is correlated with high rates of inequality, hence our crime problem in this country. But once somebody actually does commit a crime in Norway, more likely than not, prison is going to be the last resort. There are other kinds of methods. There are fines and other kinds of restorative justice grounded approaches to crime.
Like community service kind of things, you mean?
Yes, exactly. And then if someone is sent, 30% of Norway's prison system, and actually this is common throughout Scandinavia, is what's called an open prison. And that means that the individuals inside can come and go, can work jobs on the outside, and are treated like human beings throughout. So they are incarcerated, but they can remain connected to family, they could remain connected to community, receive the same social services that they were receiving on the outside, and therefore, A, have the chance to actually be corrected in a correctional system, and B, when they come home, more smoothly reintegrate into society. And even in prisons that are not open in Norway, I visited the one that is in Michael Moore's film, Bastoy Island, which is quite unique and quite dramatic, but Halden Prison, which is the other one I went to, was a more traditional prison with walls and confined spaces, but yet there's an enormous amount, again, of corrections happening. There are courses in almost everything. Again, there is this principle of treating individuals who are incarcerated like human beings, and that itself is a very radical notion and also a simple one at the same time.
In our prison system, it seems that the people who work in the prisons are kind of the bottom of the pile in the criminal justice system.
Yes.
And not only treated poorly, but paid poorly. And my understanding is that among the for-profit private prisons in the United States, it's even worse than in state prisons, where people can actually have a union and a reasonable job with a pension. A, is that the case? And B, how does that compare with how they hire and train and compensate people who work in their prison system in Norway versus the United States?
So absolutely that is the case, and it's a tragic case. I often liken it to the education system, where if we have good teachers, we have the foundation of a good education system. Well, if we have good corrections officers and good policemen and women, then we have a good justice system. But unfortunately in the U.S. and throughout much of the world, it's considered a low-level, not respected, not well-paying job. And so you're not recruiting the best people that you could be, the folks who are passionate about justice and who want to do this work. And the Norwegian system, which was just incredible to witness, it's quite the opposite. It's a very well-respected job to be in a corrections officer. I visited the staff training academy in Oslo and learned that it's a very competitive job, it's a well-paying job, and corrections officers are really thought of as educators. And so it attracts a very high caliber of individual, and I met many of these in both the prisons I was visiting in Norway and was struck by how they were more like social workers, and rather their training is actually not in sort of military operations. In the U.S., our corrections officers go through a very short training period, and much of it is essentially in military operations. In Norway, the folks are trained in philosophy, social work, psychology, law, really an in-depth, several-year-long training process that is going to ultimately produce the kinds of people that can, again, engage in corrections.
I'm assuming that Norway isn't the only country in the world that's figured this out.
No, it is not. And by no means, I certainly don't want to leave the impression that Norway is a utopia where everything is perfect. That's certainly not the case. Nowhere is a utopia. They have their issues as well and their problems. But throughout Scandinavia, we see open prisons. We also see them in the Netherlands, in Germany. There are pockets of really interesting things happening in those countries. There are also even versions of them in Australia, a system I'm quite critical of, but does have something. I recently visited a pre-release center in Australia that allows individuals, again, to come and go and remain connected to the community before they come home.
Well, we have places called halfway houses. Is that essentially what you're describing?
No, a halfway house is for someone who's come home already and served his or her time. And so it's really quite different. This is a scenario in which the walls of the prison are porous, and someone can come and go while still serving his or her time and remain.
Well, no, what I meant is if we took our halfway houses and said, okay, these are no longer halfway houses for when people are, returning home, and these are our prisons now. Would we be replicating their system in any way?
Well, that's not a bad idea, except for the fact that many of our halfway houses are utterly bereft. They don't have strong programming. They're in communities that are not conducive to corrections. Their conditions are very bad. And so I think that's one of the crises of the reentry issue is the fact that people are coming home to scenarios where they don't have a safe place to live, they don't have productive work, and we discriminate against them at every turn. And halfway houses and three-quarters houses and other kinds of housing, unfortunately, for the most part, are not good things.
Yeah, in other words, the entire system from top to bottom in the United States is broken, underfunded, underrespected, underpaid, and destructive to our society as a whole. Am I being hyperbolic?
No, you're 100% correct. And I think we increasingly there's more awareness of this reality, which is nice to see. But we're still, we're locking 2.3 million people up in this country. There are 10 million people locked up worldwide. Over 3 million of them haven't been convicted of anything. They're awaiting trial. That's an enormous number. So when we're talking about this as a crisis, it is no hyperbole. It's absolutely a crisis.
So do you see, we're talking with Dr. Baz Dreisinger. Am I saying your name right?
Baz Dreisinger.
Baz Dreisinger. Thank you. My apologies. Dr. Baz Dreisinger, and professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, City University of New York, and has a new book out, Incarceration Nations, A Journey to Justice in Prisons Around the World. Dr. Dreisinger, are you seeing any glimmers of hope here in the United States?
I see glimmers of hope almost everywhere there's something, because I think there are like-minded progressive people who recognize that the system, A, doesn't work, and B, is morally bankrupt. So in the U.S., we're certainly seeing, and this is in part due to the popularity of films like 13th, even Orange is the New Black, the book The New Jim Crow, things that have brought this issue to a mainstream place, which is very exciting. So we're seeing a movement towards, number one, bail reform, and bail as an issue in jails, and the conversation around, again, pretrial detention hitting the mainstream, and the elimination of cash bail in certain states like New Jersey, which is exciting and very promising. We certainly see a return to some educational programs.
That's great. It's a great sign. Great signs. Dr. Dreisinger, thank you so much for being with us.
pleasure. Thank you.
The book is Incarceration Nations.